The people of Mill Creek had never expected much from Eliza Finch. She was small, slight of frame, with hands better suited for embroidery than heavy work. When the women of the settlement hoisted barrels of grain into wagons, Eliza stood aside, offering thread or bandages, which seemed of little use to those who measured strength by lifted weight and calloused palms. Children whispered about her pallor. Grown men smirked when she passed carrying only a small basket. She knew what they said, that she was too weak, too delicate, a burden best left to spin cloth while others endured the hardships of war. The irony was that Eliza had grown used to such mockery. She wore it as one might wear an old shawl, uncomfortable but familiar. What she had never grown used to was the gnawing loneliness it created. Her mother had died years before. Her father had joined the militia and never returned from the skirmishes near Camden. With no siblings to speak for her, no husband to shield her reputation, she walked in the world as a woman unclaimed and underestimated. That evening, clouds sagged low over the Carolina pines. A thin rain fell, soaking through the branches, leaving the forest floor slick with mud. Eliza had ventured toward the creek with a wooden pail to fetch water before nightfall. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and bent low, listening to the rush of the stream. The settlement's cabins were a quarter-mile behind her. Out here, the woods felt vast, filled with shadows that seemed to lean closer with each passing year of war. She knelt at the water's edge, dipping the pail. The current burbled, carrying fragments of pine needles downstream. She had just straightened when the sound broke her breath short, a heavy crash in the undergrowth, followed by a low groan. Her heart jolted. For a moment, she considered flight, running back to the safety of lamplight and familiar walls. But something in the tone of that groan, half human, half animal, rooted her in place. "Hello," she called softly. Her voice trembled. No answer came, only the drip of rain and another rustle of branches. Eliza edged closer, her boots sinking into damp earth. There, beyond the ferns, lay a man sprawled against a tree trunk. His coat, once blue, was torn and stained dark at the side. His boots were muddied, his tri-cornered hat cast aside. The stubble on his jaw was streaked with blood and rain. His eyes fluttered open at her approach, and she felt the weight of them, sharp, gray, and commanding even in pain. "Don't let them find me," he rasped. His accent was colonial, his words clipped with urgency. He tried to push himself upright, but the motion tore another groan from his chest. Eliza saw then the wound, an ugly gash just below his ribs, hastily bandaged with a strip of linen already soaked through. Her breath caught. She knew enough of the war to recognize what she faced. This was no common soldier. She had heard whispers in the village tavern, names carried like rumors on the wind. Colonel Gabriel Reed, the so-called Grey Wolf, a man whose raids had harried His Majesty's troops through swamps and backwoods, a shadow who vanished before British sabres could cut him down. The redcoats despised him, feared him even, for his ability to rally farmers and hunters into bands of ghosts who struck supply lines and disappeared by dawn. And here he was, bleeding at her feet. For an instant, Eliza's world spun with fear. To be caught aiding a rebel officer meant death, or worse, public humiliation before the British dragoons who rode through these settlements. Major Rutledge's men had flogged farmers for less. Her neighbors would never defend her. Many secretly leaned loyalists to protect their cattle and their skins. If they found Reed in her company, she would be ruined, perhaps hanged. But she looked again at his face, drawn tight with pain, yet defiant even as his body failed him. Something within her rose, a stubbornness she had never shown the villagers. She refused to let him be captured like a wounded animal. "Can you walk?" she whispered. He tried to stand, faltered and sank back. Rain pattered against his shoulders. "Not far." Eliza set her pail aside and slipped her arm beneath his, surprised by the heat radiating from his body, the shudder in his breath. He was heavier than she expected, but adrenaline gave her strength. "Come," she urged, half dragging, half supporting him. Step by painful step, she guided him through the underbrush, back toward the narrow path leading to her cabin. Each sound made her flinch, the distant roll of thunder, the creak of branches heavy with rain. She imagined hoofbeats at any moment, scarlet uniforms appearing between the pines. Her heart pounded as though it would tear through her ribs. Still she pressed on. At last the cabin came into sight, a modest dwelling of rough-hewn logs, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. She shoved the door open with her shoulder and eased Reed inside. He collapsed onto the wooden floor, teeth gritted against the pane. The lamplight revealed the pallor of his face, the sheen of sweat on his brow. "Stay quiet," Eliza murmured. She bolted the door and hurried to fetch cloths from a chest. With trembling hands, she cut strips of linen, dipped them in vinegar, and pressed them against his wound. He hissed, muscles taut, but did not cry out. She cleaned as best she could, recalling her mother's old remedies. Her hands shook, yet she forced herself steady, whispering words of comfort she barely believed. "You're safe here for now." Reed's eyes flicked toward her, sharp even in fever. "Why risk yourself?" he asked hoarsely. Eliza hesitated. The question pierced deeper than she expected. Why indeed? She thought of the villagers' laughter, the way they dismissed her as weak, as nothing. Here in this moment she had the chance to prove, to herself if to no one else, that smallness did not mean uselessness. She met his gaze with quiet defiance. Because no one else would. His breath eased, a ghost of a smile crossing his face before his eyes closed. Eliza continued her work, binding the wound tighter, propping him against a straw mattress near the hearth. She prayed the rain would mask their trail, that no curious neighbor would notice her lateness at the creek. Outside, night deepened, the forest alive with the hiss of water and the distant echo of a horse's whinny. Boots. The unmistakable crunch of them in wet earth, close, far too close. Eliza froze, cloth in hand. Through the shutter slats, a lantern glow wavered, accompanied by the jingle of spurs. Her blood turned cold. British dragoons. They were combing the settlement. A sharp knock rattled the door. "Open in the king's name." Eliza's heart thundered. She glanced at the colonel, unconscious now, breath shallow. Her pulse hammered as the knock came again, louder. She wiped her hands quickly, smoothed her dress, and stepped toward the door. Behind her, the feared grey wolf lay hidden, and her entire fate balanced on the strength of her next breath. The knock at the door had stopped, but the echo of spurred boots lingered in the cabin, rattling Eliza Finch's nerves. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, listening to the distant crunch of the patrol on the muddy lane outside. Every second stretched like a taut rope, threatening to snap. Colonel Gabriel Reed stirred behind her, groaning softly, a wet strip of linen pressed to his side. His eyes flickered open, gray and piercing, filled with a wary curiosity. "They're close," he murmured, voice hoarse, every syllable a struggle. "You'll need to be clever." Eliza swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Cleverness had been her refuge all her life, though often dismissed by her neighbors as childish scheming. Now it was a weapon of survival. She squared her shoulders, forcing a calm she did not feel, and moved to the hearth where a lantern flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the room. "I have to make them believe no one is here," she whispered. "Do you trust me?" Reed's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "I have no choice," he rasped. She hurriedly gathered common household items. A broom, a battered pewter mug, a small stool. Placing them haphazardly by the door and windows, she created the illusion of an ordinary, occupied cabin, hiding the truth in plain sight. The lantern's glow danced over the walls, making them appear warm and lived in. Outside, voices barked commands in clipped English, the distinct tones of British officers and their men. "Miss Finch!" A commanding voice called through the rain, firm and probing. "Open this door. We know someone is hiding here." Eliza's stomach twisted. She drew a deep, trembling breath and answered as though speaking to the wind. "No one is here, sir. Just me. I was fetching water." Her voice wavered, but she kept it steady enough to sound believable. Then another shout. The patrol says otherwise. We'll see about that. She held her breath as the shadows outside shifted. A lantern bobbed through the rain, illuminating the mud-slick path. She needed to buy time, and she needed it now. Eliza's fingers twitched as she pulled a small notebook from her apron, scribbled a quick note with instructions for Reed, and tucked it into the folds of her shawl. The sargento outside rapped again, this time with greater insistence. Eliza took a step back, raising her voice slightly higher. You'll find no one here. I've been alone since the evening bell. Her heart thudded as she carefully opened a small side window, allowing the faint flicker of lamplight to reach the patrol. I have some tea in the hearth, she added, her voice trembling with feigned hospitality. You're welcome to come in. A murmur ran through the patrol. She could hear them debating. The British were disciplined, but not invincible in suspicion. They were prone to logic, especially when they could not see what they sought. Eliza counted her seconds, calculating the distance between the cabin and the woods beyond, and plotted her next move. Let me fetch it, she added, lifting a kettle from the hearth. She moved deliberately slow, letting the sargento see her, making her motions deliberate and harmless. Meanwhile, she crept to Reed, kneeling beside him. His eyes met hers, unblinking, filled with that mixture of pain and recognition of the impossible. We can't stay here, he whispered, each word dragging at his strength. They'll search, or someone will betray us. We must move. Eliza nodded, her mind racing. She had been preparing for this. Secret paths through the marsh, the abandoned miller's hut across the creek, and an old fishing skiff tied to a hidden stake. The plans were childish sketches, crude diagrams, but they could work if executed quickly and quietly. There's a way, she said. Follow me when the moment comes. Outside, the patrol's voices rose. They had decided to investigate more closely. Eliza could hear boots crunching nearer, the metallic clink of a sword drawn. Time was slipping. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling Reed to remain silent, then whispered, You must trust me fully. One wrong step. He grasped her wrist weakly. I trust you. Just move quickly. She glanced at the window. The lantern's glow was wavering, throwing shadows that resembled specters of the night. She whispered a brief prayer, then carefully lifted Reed, supporting his weight as best she could. His body was surprisingly heavy, but adrenaline sharpened her limbs. Each step toward the back door felt like a gamble. The mud sucked at her boots. Every twig snapped with an echo that made her flinch. Behind them, the voices of the patrol grew louder. Eliza Finch. The sargento barked louder this time. Do not attempt to deceive His Majesty's men. She forced a small cough and called back in her most timid voice. I'm fetching water. Just water. Her lips were dry, her lungs burning with each breath, yet she pushed onward, keeping Reed's head low and hidden beneath her shawl. They reached the edge of the woods, where the shadows of pines merged with the darkness of night. Eliza guided him through narrow paths known only to her, across muddy tracks and over fallen branches. She whispered instructions, warning him of roots and bogs. Every step was a test, a calculation of sound, distance, and visibility. They moved in near silence, only the drip of rain and the muted splash of their feet in puddles marking their progress. Hours passed, though the moon had yet to rise fully. Eliza's muscles screamed, but determination carried her. At last, they reached a small clearing, where an old neighbor of hers, Matthias, a blacksmith whose loyalties were quietly patriotic, waited with a cart and a thick blanket. He had agreed to help only after receiving her secret note, his eyes narrowing in concern as he took in Reed's battered form. By God, he muttered. You've got yourself a fine mess, girl. Eliza ignored the scolding. Cover him, she instructed. We move quietly to the river. A skiff waits beyond the bend. Matthias nodded, understanding the unspoken urgency. Together, they lifted Reed into the cart, draping him with blankets. Eliza's fingers clutched the reins, her knuckles white, as they crept toward the marshy path that would lead them to temporary safety. The patrol had slowed their search, assuming the cabin empty or that they had lost the trail. But one neighbor, old and jealous, had seen the lanterns flicker earlier and muttered suspicion to a passing redcoat. The risk was far from over. Eliza knew that every step toward the river was a gamble, every shadow a potential enemy. Yet she pressed on, heart hammering, lungs burning, guided by the desperate conviction that her strength, so long mocked, was the only thing standing between the feared colonel and capture. By the time they reached the riverbank, a thin mist had begun to curl over the water. Eliza lowered Reed carefully into the skiff, the boat wobbling under his weight. Matthias pushed from the shore with long oars, while Eliza clutched the blankets, keeping watch for lanterns or shadows. Across the water, the woods grew thick, hiding their passage from prying eyes. They drifted silently, the current carrying them toward temporary refuge, each moment a silent prayer, each ripple a reminder of how close discovery could be. Reed opened his eyes once more, weak but defiant. "You've done more than anyone could expect," he said, voice low, rasping. "Even if I never survive the night, they will remember this. They will remember you." Eliza allowed herself a brief, trembling smile. "I only did what I had to," she replied, though inwardly she knew the night was far from over. Danger lurked in every shadow, and cunning alone might not be enough to carry them through the next hours. Yet for the first time she felt the quiet surge of power in her own resolve, the very strength the village had never seen, the same strength that might yet save them both. The skiff scraped against the far bank of the river, its wooden hull whispering across reeds slick with mist. Eliza steadied herself, clutching the side as Matthias hauled on the oars one last time. The air was damp, smelling of mud and pine sap, the silence broken only by the soft gurgle of the current. She pulled the blanket tighter around Colonel Reed, whose face had grown even paler during the crossing. His breath rattled faintly, a rasp that chilled her to the bone. "Easy," Matthias muttered as he stepped out into the shallow water, dragging the skiff ashore. His shoulders, broad and strong from years at the forge, glistened with rain. "We'll need to keep moving before the patrols double back. These woods aren't safe." Eliza nodded, though her own strength was waning. Her arms trembled from holding Reed steady, her legs sore from hours of trudging through muck. Yet she knew resting here would be foolish. The British Dragoon companies were thorough. Their commander, Major Rutledge, was infamous for pressing locals into betraying rebels. One whispered word from a neighbor could doom them all. "Help me lift him," Eliza said, her voice low but firm. Together, she and Matthias eased Reed from the skiff. He groaned, head lolling against Eliza's shoulder. For a moment she felt the weight of him fully, his body heavy with both exhaustion and authority. He was a man who had commanded dozens, perhaps hundreds, but here he was reduced to the fragility of flesh. They staggered onto a narrow deer path that snaked through the undergrowth. The rain had eased into a drizzle, but the ground remained treacherous. Each step squelched in mud, each branch snagged Eliza's shawl. She pressed on, whispering encouragement into Reed's ear, though he hardly seemed to hear. After half a mile, Matthias halted, raising a hand. "Listen." Eliza froze. At first, she heard only the drip of water from leaves. Then, faint but unmistakable, the distant thud of hooves. Horses, moving at a steady pace along the ridge beyond the trees. Patrol. Her heart leapt into her throat. They were too exposed. The path offered no shelter, only thin pines that could not conceal them. Panic surged, but she forced it down. Fear was useless now. "Off the path," she whispered urgently. "Into the thicket." Matthias grimaced but obeyed, half carrying Reed as they pushed into brambles. Branches scratched Eliza's arms, tearing at her dress, but she did not care. They crouched low, bodies pressed to the earth. Lantern light flickered faintly through the rain as a line of redcoats passed above them, the clink of harness and jingle of bridles echoing in the night. Reed stirred, trying to raise himself. Eliza placed a hand firmly on his chest. "Still," she breathed. His eyes met hers, sharp even through fever, and for a moment she thought he might resist. Then he sagged back, trusting her. The patrol moved on, hooves fading into the distance. Eliza exhaled slowly, her body trembling. The brush around them smelled of wet earth and crushed pine needles. When the silence deepened, Matthias gave a sharp nod. We move again, but carefully. The river's bend leads to an old ferry crossing. If we can reach it, we'll be safer. They rose, guiding Reed forward once more. Each step was agony. The colonel stumbled often. His wound reopening, blood seeping through the linen Eliza had bound hours earlier. Her heart twisted at the sight, but she pressed the cloth tighter, whispering encouragement. Just a little farther. You must hold on. At last, the trees parted to reveal the remnants of the ferry. A rotting dock, its planks warped and broken, jutting into the misty current. A few ropes dangled from posts, swaying in the breeze like forgotten sentinels. The place was deserted, the silence eerie, yet Eliza felt a flicker of hope. Here at least they could pause. Matthias lowered Reed onto a stack of damp logs, muttering curses under his breath. He won't last long without proper tending, he said. You've done well, Eliza, but he needs a surgeon. Eliza's throat tightened. She knew Matthias spoke the truth, but finding a surgeon loyal to the cause was dangerous. British officers had seized many town physicians, forcing them to serve under watch. Then we keep him alive until we find one, she said firmly, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. She knelt by Reed, pressing fresh cloths to his side. His eyes fluttered open, and he gave a faint, rueful smile. You should leave me. Save yourself. Eliza shook her head fiercely. No. They say I'm weak, Colonel. Perhaps I am. But I won't abandon you. His gaze lingered on her, filled with something like respect, before exhaustion pulled his lids shut again. The night deepened. Mist curled thicker around the river, muffling sound, cloaking them in gray. Eliza wrapped Reed in a blanket, her fingers brushing his fevered skin. She shivered, not from cold but from the enormity of what lay ahead. They could not remain here. At dawn, the British would comb every crossing, every marsh. Then it came, the crack of a branch, sharp and deliberate. Eliza stiffened, heart pounding. She signaled Matthias to silence. Slowly, she peered through the mist. On the far side of the river, faint glows of fire pricked the darkness. Campfires. She squinted, and her blood ran cold. Silhouettes moved in disciplined patterns. British dragoons, their horses tethered nearby. They had made camp at the crossing, waiting like wolves. We're trapped, Matthias whispered grimly. Eliza's mind raced. Retreat was impossible. The patrol behind would surely catch their trail by morning. Yet pushing forward meant walking into the jaws of the enemy. Her breath came fast, but she steadied herself. There had to be another way. She studied the riverbank, the tangled reeds, the slope leading back into the swamp. A plan formed, desperate but possible. We won't cross here, she said. We'll circle upstream, make them believe we've already passed. If they search the wrong direction, we might slip through. Matthias frowned. That's madness. Perhaps, Eliza said softly. But madness may be all we have. She gathered mud in her hands, smearing it across Reed's boots to mask their trail. Then she pressed more along the path behind them, creating false prints leading toward the dock. Every movement was precise, each detail meant to deceive. As she worked, she thought of the villagers who had laughed at her weakness, the neighbors who doubted her. They would never believe she could outwit armed soldiers. Yet here she was, risking everything to save a man they feared too much to even name aloud. When the false trail was laid, Eliza motioned for Matthias to lift Reed again. Together they turned upstream, moving silently through the reeds. The mist swallowed them, cloaking their passage. Behind them, the glow of the British campfires flickered brighter, a reminder of the danger only steps away. Eliza's heart thundered as she guided them deeper into the swamp. Every branch seemed to snap too loudly, every splash in the mud too sharp. She prayed their deception would hold, that the enemy would be lured by the false tracks. But as they moved, a sudden sound tore through the night, the crack of a musket echoing across the river. Reed gasped, stumbling. The ball had grazed his arm, tearing fabric and skin. He sagged heavily against Eliza, blood dripping anew. Panic surged through her, but she forced it down. She wrapped her arm around him, half dragging, half carrying him through the muck. Her lungs burned, her legs quaked, yet she pressed forward, whispering fiercely into his ear, "You will not fall here. Not tonight." Behind them, shouts rose across the water. The British had seen movement, though whether they pursued the false trail or their real one, Eliza could not tell. The mist thickened, closing around them like a curtain. Each step carried them farther from the crossing, deeper into uncertainty. Eliza's dress clung heavy with rain and mud, her strength nearly spent. Yet she would not yield. Not while the man most feared by His Majesty's troops leaned on her frail shoulders, depending on the very weakness the world had mocked. The river lay between them and freedom, but dawn was coming, and with it, choices that would test every ounce of courage she possessed. The swamp was a labyrinth of shadows, reeds whispering as Eliza pressed forward with Colonel Reed slung across her shoulder. Matthias struggled at her side, jaw clenched, hauling what weight she could not bear. The colonel's fevered breath rasped against Eliza's ear. Blood from the musket graze streaked his sleeve, and the older wound in his ribs bled through her makeshift bindings. Night was breaking. The eastern sky, though veiled by mist, had begun to pale. With dawn would come visibility, clarity to the soldiers scouring the marsh. The cover darkness had lent them was fading fast. "We can't keep dragging him like this," Matthias muttered hoarsely. His boots sucked in and out of the mud with each step. "He's too far gone." Eliza tightened her grip on Reed, defiance burning in her chest. "He isn't gone. He won't be. Not while I still have strength in me." Matthias gave her a grim look but said nothing. He knew better than to argue when her eyes shone like that, bright, determined, unyielding. Ahead, the swamp opened into a clearing dotted with ancient oaks, their limbs heavy with moss. A crumbling stone wall traced one edge, a remnant of an old farm abandoned years ago. Eliza knew this place. As a child, she had hidden here during games of chase, imagining herself unseen by all the world. Now, she prayed the ruin would grant them a moment's reprieve. They laid Reed gently against the stones. His lips were cracked, his skin pale with fever, yet his eyes opened when Eliza brushed damp hair from his brow. "You should have left me," he whispered again, stubborn even in weakness. She shook her head, her voice fierce. "And let them hang you in chains. Let them boast they caught the grey wolf like a cornered beast. Well, you will live. You must live." His gaze lingered on her, a faint spark of something. Respect, gratitude, perhaps more, before exhaustion claimed him once again. A sound carried across the mist then, the distant bark of dogs. Eliza's blood froze. Rutledge's dragoons had loosed their hounds. The baying drew nearer, sharper, carried on the damp air. Matthias cursed under his breath. "We'll never outrun them now." Eliza's mind raced. She could hear hoofbeats beyond the ridge, shouts echoing as soldiers spread out. They would sweep the swamp clean, and nothing, certainly not a frail woman and 2 wounded men, would stand in their path. Unless she found a way to mislead them. She scanned the clearing. The moss, the mud, the tangle of reeds. An idea sparked, desperate but possible. She smeared mud thick across Reed's boots and Matthias's, then dragged a branch to scuff the ground in a trail leading eastward, toward the shallows. She tore a strip from her own shawl and tied it to a branch where the false trail ended, as if they had crossed there. "Follow me," she hissed, guiding Matthias and Reed west instead, slipping through the trees where the ground rose slightly drier. The dogs bayed louder, then shifted east as the soldiers picked up the planted trail. For a brief, miraculous moment, the ruse worked. But fate was cruel. A musket cracked close by, splintering bark above Eliza's head. She ducked, heart hammering. Through the trees she glimpsed scarlet coats advancing, bayonets gleaming in the first light of dawn. "We're surrounded," Matthias growled. Eliza refused to yield. She pulled Reed's arm over her shoulder, gritting her teeth as she hauled him up. "Then we go through them." They stumbled toward the ridge where the forest thinned. Beyond lay open ground, a meadow bordered by rolling fields. And there, faint but unmistakable, a horn call split the morning air. Not British. Colonial. Reed stirred, eyes flashing open at the sound. Strength seemed to surge through him, ragged but real. He fumbled at his coat, pulling free a small powder horn carved with markings. "Signal," he croaked. Give it, blast." Eliza seized it, raising it to her lips. She blew, the note trembling but carrying far into the waking world. It echoed across the meadow, over the river, into the woods. Once, three times. The British patrols froze, heads turning. Dogs howled, confused. Then, from the tree line opposite, figures emerged. Farmers with muskets slung across shoulders, hunters with powder horns, boys scarcely more than 16, all answering the call. Militia. Reed's men. The meadow erupted in shouts. The ragged band surged forward, their numbers swelling as more spilled from the trees. Not a grand army in fine coats, but men hardened by fields and woods, answering their colonel's cry. Rutledge himself rode into view astride a dark stallion, saber flashing. His voice carried above the din. "Hold ranks! Drive them back!" The British dragoons formed quickly, disciplined lines wheeling into position. Muskets leveled. Eliza's breath caught. This was no place for her. Yet she stood firm, clutching Reed upright as he tried to rise. His voice was hoarse but commanding as he shouted across the clearing. "Hold steady, men! The dawn is ours!" The militia roared in answer. Muskets cracked, smoke rolling across the field. The British line faltered under the unexpected resistance. A volley from the farmers tore into their flank. Rutledge cursed, saber slashing through air, rallying his dragoons, but their confidence wavered. They had expected a wounded fugitive, not a muster at dawn. Amid the chaos, Eliza dragged Reed toward the shelter of the stone wall. Musket balls whined past, thudding into earth and wood. Matthias shielded them, brandishing an old pistol he had carried from his forge. The battle was brief, fierce, and chaotic. The militia, though ragged, fought with the fury of men defending their land. The British, outnumbered and surprised, began to pull back. Rutledge's stallion reared as he realized the futility. He shouted orders, and the dragoons withdrew in disciplined retreat, vanishing into the mist as quickly as they had come. Silence followed, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of musket smoke dissipating. Eliza sank to her knees beside Reed, trembling with exhaustion. He looked at her, his gray eyes soft despite his pallor. "You saved me," he said simply, the weight of the words carrying more than gratitude. "More than that, you saved them." He gestured faintly toward the militia gathering, men clasping one another's shoulders, rallying around their colonel. Eliza shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They'll never believe it. To them, I am just a frail girl." Reed reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "They will believe it because I will tell them. Every man here will know that Eliza Finch bore the grey wolf through the night and kept him from the king's chains. Your name will not be forgotten." Voices rose around them, cheers mingling with prayers of relief. The first rays of sun pierced the mist, gilding the meadow in pale gold. Eliza gazed at the light breaking through the clouds, her heart swelling with something fierce and new. For once, she felt no mockery, no whispers of weakness, only the weight of truth. She had been underestimated all her life, dismissed as too small, too fragile. Yet it was her frail shoulders that had carried the Patriot most feared by His Majesty's troops through storm, swamp, and pursuit. And at dawn, it was her courage that had summoned hope from despair. The war would rage on. Battles would be fought and lives lost. But in this moment, Eliza Finch stood not as the village weakling, but as a woman whose quiet strength had changed the course of a single dawn. And perhaps, in time, the course of a war.